Welcome to Beauty and the Biz. Discover how to grow your practice with effective cosmetic patient attraction, conversion, and retention advice from author, speaker, trainer, and cosmetic practice business and marketing coach, Catherine Maley, MBA.
Hello and welcome to Beauty and the Biz, where we talk about the marketing and business side of plastic surgery practices. I'm your host, Catherine Maley, author of Your Aesthetic Practice, What Your Patients Are Saying, as well as consultant to plastic surgery practices to get them more patients and more profits. Now, today's episode is very, very special. I have a theme for it. This one's called How to Persevere Through Chaos. And I have a super special guest to help me out with this topic, and it's Dr. Robert Kotler of Beverly Hills. And he is an icon in our industry. So Dr. Kotler, he's a facial cosmetic surgeon who's been in practice over 30 years, and he's performed more than 10,000 surgical procedures. Now, he's been ranked among the top physicians in the nation based on patient reviews. I've never seen anybody so good at patient interaction as I have with Dr. Kotler. Now, actually, in the nation, we've got 720,000 active physicians, and only 5% have received that honor. So that's a pretty big deal. Also, Dr. Kotler was raised in my hometown of Chicago. I still haven't lost my accent, and he doesn't seem to have one. And he did serve in the Army, and then he found his way to Beverly Hills, which I find to be a trip. Chicago and Beverly Hills are very different. And that's where he specializes in only 5 facial cosmetic procedures. And there's a hint there. That's what sets him apart as a super specialist. Now, Dr. Kotler, he's a teacher, a medical writer. He's author of books for the consumer, which are excellent. And he's also invented several products. One of them is the Kotler Saline Demo. And that's to give the consumer like a sneak preview of his technique of micro droplet permanent non-surgical rhinoplasty, which I find fascinating. And then this one's interesting. He's also the inventor of the Reltalk Clear Flow Nasal Airway that is an FDA cleared patented medical device that gives you clear breathing after nasal and sinus surgery. And I can attest to this one because I even used it for my own rhinoplasty many years ago. And it was a super big help during recovery because you can actually breathe. So for those of you who have been around for a while, he was one of the first surgeons to be on a reality show called Extreme Makeover. And boy, was that a popular show. It was just so interesting because that's when plastic surgery was just hitting the consumer market, like in a big way. It was going to go mainstream. So I would love to hear from him about his experience from that, like, and how it affected his practice. But first, we're going to welcome Dr. Kotler. And by the way, did I leave anything important out, Dr. Kotler?
No, I think my mother, may she rest in peace, would be very proud of your summary of my professional life. Thank you very much. Great to be with you, Catherine. I don't know anybody who understands our industry better than you do. You've been indefatigable in helping everybody, and I'm glad to be a part of this. I'm glad to share my experience.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm so glad I finally got your attention because this is the perfect time for us to talk about chaos and how you get through those muddy waters. So, of course, we have to address the big deal going on right now, which is the COVID-19 situation that has completely taken over the world. So, Dr. Kotler, can you just give me your view on what's going on and how it's affected you and where you think you're going to go with this?
Yeah, you're right. I don't think anybody could have foreseen this, how an infectious disease has now turned the world upside down economically, medically, etc. Well, there's no question that in speaking with my business friends who've also been around a while, I think we're going to face a recession. I think there's going to be a very unsatisfactory environment for elective surgery because that is the history. And yes, I've lived for at least 2 of those, and it's no fun. Because what we do for patients, as important as it is, takes 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th place compared to, you need to pay your rent, you need to have food, you need to get your kids through school. So I think, unfortunately, it's going to be a little rough ride. And it means everybody's got to think more and work harder. And then what do you do? And then I know the question is, what do you do? Well, frankly, you've got to figure out a way of keeping in touch with the pool of potential patients, and I know we'll talk later about social media and all the other means, and you've got to position yourself. I think this is probably the single most important concept. How do you position yourself in the community? How do you position yourself vis-a-vis other doctors who do the same thing? For patients, sometimes it's confusing. If they look at people's resumes, they say, well, yes, graduated from good school, board certified, took a fellowship. Those are all kind of equivalents in their minds. So what would separate Dr. A from Dr. B in terms of being more attractive to at least consult with? What is it about your practice, Dr. A, that makes you different from Dr. B? And I have some thoughts about that. I think the best single thing you can do is you must differentiate yourself by either doing a limited number of procedures and thereby excel in them because results count, obviously. And you've got to be able to tell the world that that's what you do and why you do it better. This is a basic principle. And again, we should keep an eye on what's happening in the world because people have choices. And every day we have to make decisions about what car do we buy, what clothing do we buy. Well, what makes one stand out against another? Why do some people like Levi's for denims and others want to buy designer denims, perhaps at a greater cost, right? And you have to do that by essentially doing something better, something more sophisticated, something that brings a highest level of patient satisfaction. And we'll talk about this later, but I think a lot of physicians, and this, I shouldn't say physicians large, but the surgeons in our world maybe need to stop doing certain things that someone else is doing better. And if somebody else is doing it better down the street, I think you're serving the patient best, and they appreciate that by referring the patient. We can't all do everything at the top of the totem pole. It's impossible. We can't master all the possible cosmetic procedures. So I think it's better to focus down on the ones you like to do, the ones that you know you get the best results with, say. Because as you mentioned the reviews, and thank you very much, but the truth is reviews are so important because the bad ones, if they're in the majority or even a significant proportion, that's the worst news you can have. So you got to do procedures that you could be successful in. And you know which ones you're the best at, and you know which ones maybe you're not the best. Hard to give it up, I understand. You trained, you learned it, but maybe it's not your greatest strength. I'm working off a much smaller menu now than it was even 5 years ago.
You know what I see coming, though? Because I saw it the last time we had a recession, the surgeons panicked, and they went back to reconstructive and insurance, and they went back to taking the medical cases because the cosmetic got hit really hard, and they panicked. And now they try to do both. And that's doing both is definitely not the answer either. I'm not sure what the answer is, but you've been through both of those, the medical transition to cosmetic cash patients. Can you just give your rendition of how do you balance those? Can you balance those? Can you do both?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the first question is, where do you practice? If you're practicing in a relatively sophisticated area, meaning the larger cities, I think it's impossible. If you're the only, say you're a general plastic surgeon and your service area is 3 counties in Missouri and you're a long way from Kansas City or St. Louis, well, there's going to be a need for your services and you have no choice, I think. So I do think it's a step backwards. I agree with you. I think that once you switch from train A to train B, you should try to stay on train B. And likewise, those who like reconstructive surgery, hospital-based, they're best off not trying to make that transition in difficult times. They are two worlds. It's like riding 2 different horses. I remember one of my teachers told me that he reserved Saturday to see all his major cancer reconstructive surgeries because if patients were sitting in the waiting room seeing those people and they're sitting in the waiting room for routine sinusitis or some other problem, they'd run out the door saying, oh my God, half the face is missing. Did that patient have a sinus problem like I do?
Yeah.
That was good advice. Yeah. See, so it's very difficult today. We all did it looking back in the earlier days in the 1980s, early 1990s, but I think it's just impossible. I don't think you should not take the step back unless there's absolutely no alternative.
Okay, because even the alternative that used to be was insurance. Even that, is that really a good alternative? Like, let's say you did decide, you know what, I'm shying away from cosmetic. I'm going to stick to the safe business, the safe practice of, insurance-based procedures. I don't think that's any safer than cosmetic.
Well, it's a different world too, because now the hospitals is most likely you're going to be an employee of the hospital. Oh. And that's another trend that's fairly recent, and is that good? I think for some it is good, but that hospital paying you, they're not paying you to do cosmetic surgery because cosmetic surgery are not good cases for hospitals. So you're going to be doing only reconstructive surgery. So now you're an employee and you must listen to your employer. And that's another strike against making that step back away from cosmetic procedures and trying to rely on reconstructive. As I say, in the past, it was possible. Today, I think much more difficult.
Yeah, I probably get calls every week from surgeons trying to leave the hospital and get into cosmetic. It's more of a mindset shift for them than anything. By the way, you came from Chicago, and so did I. How in the world did you get from Chicago to Beverly Hills?
Well, it took me a long time. because I am from Chicago, and I went to medical school in Chicago, did my residency there. But I did my internship out in California, and I kind of fell in love with it. And I said, someday I'd like to come back here to California. You know, if you come out in the middle of winter, it's looking pretty good if you're a Midwesterner. So, but the route was long because I wasn't my own man. When I finished my residency, I went on active duty in the Army because I had been a reserve officer for 7 years, and I was called up to do the 2 years active duty. So when I finished that, finally I was a free man, and my wife and I agreed we'd like to try Southern California, having lived in Northern California and San Francisco. And I had some of my relatives were here, and we liked it, and we said, okay, I think we'll wind up settling here. And I used the fellowship that I took here. I was in the early days of cosmetic surgery fellowships, and it was very valuable. But I used that time to look around because I didn't know what was going on, where people practicing, where is their need. And I knew I couldn't open a purely cosmetic surgery practice. That was impossible in those days because they were first of all, there were extremely strong, nationally recognized practitioners here. So I did combine my reconstructive work and general head and neck surgery for the first 7 years of the practice. Started the practice from zero, but at least I had a little sense after being here for a while, and I worked for an HMO for a short period of time just to buy more time and get a little income, that I felt I could get a practice going. And because I had the excellent residency in cosmetic work, as well as did a lot in the military, and then had the fellowship, that at some point I would like to do that work. But I couldn't tell myself or anybody else how long it might take, and it took 7 years.
And what was the competitive landscape like then and now?
Well, interestingly, there were only a handful of cosmetic surgeons that were quite successful. Let's put it that way. They were good. I could rattle off a few names that some of the doctors might know, but they were good. There were some general plastic surgeons that were doing great work, and there were some head and neck surgeons doing great work. I apprenticed myself to one of those after my fellowship, so I really wanted to learn as much as I could, and the quality was very good here. But I would say there were 10 or fewer that had a very strong reputation. That's not many. Well, when I moved into the building that I'm in now, and I moved in the building in 1990, there were 3 of us in the building who were sort of, serious cosmetic surgeons. There are now 26 names on the roster of surgeons who do cosmetic surgery. Now, admittedly, some are only here part-time. It's an advantage to have some Beverly Hills practice. And this may not be the norm for anywhere in the world other than Beverly Hills. I'm kind of laughing because all those names on the roster, you think they're like 50, 60 office suites, and there aren't. There's a limited number, but everybody's kind of piling in and piling on part-time. Timeshare, all those things are practical. So there's no question that competition is still the major economic limitation, supply and demand. And the supply is very plentiful. There's no question. And we continue to have younger practitioners come into the community. Some have left, but by and large, the community is larger than ever here. And is the supply of patients totally elastic? Will it continue to expand and expand to have surgeons reasonably busy? Now we're going to find out, because now it's going to get tougher.
Wow, as if it weren't.
And that's here. It may be the same in New York, and I don't, in Houston and in Miami and the other major centers, but supply and demand is always the number one rule of economics.
Well, I know I get a call a lot of times that the doctor wants to move to Beverly Hills, and I just think, could you go anywhere more competitive? And they said, but that's where the market is. And I think, can Beverly Hills sustain all of these plastic surgeons who I think are under the illusion that everybody's rich there? And that's
an illusion. No, because first of all, there's a limited number of ultra wealthy. There are 10 million people in Los Angeles County, for example. Now, yes, there is a big thirst for cosmetic procedures in Southern California. There's no question. Los Angeles area, Orange County, Newport Beach, for example, all the way down to San Diego. Unquestionably a stronger interest perhaps in other parts of the country. Nonetheless, there's only a finite number of people. And as I see it, here's what happens. There's a broad span of socioeconomic qualification. The first people to fall off from the pool or fall out of the pool of those who'd like to have cosmetic surgeries are those with lower incomes. Now, the fees have been actually, relative to other costs, good, reasonable, and affordable for a lot of people, but now they won't be affordable for some segments of that when the economy has difficulties, and we saw that before. And yes, the exposure through, Extreme Makeover, Dr. 90210, and all these other programs was great. It opened the public's eyes to what could be done, and through competition, the fees have been pretty stable, generally less than the general rate of inflation. But that said, when things get tougher, a fair segment that came into the market will leave the market, see? In other words, the ultra-rich will still have it, but there's only so many of those to go around. So that's our experience here, and that if they became popular because it was seen as reasonably affordable, then a lot more people entered the pool who, in tough times, probably will not be in the pool of prospective patients.
And then as times get tougher, what happens is a group of your competitors will start price cutting. And it kind of dummies down the whole thing, because now how do you market? Because you're a really good marketer. You were really good way before when it was still traditional, like magazines, TV, radio. And then you're a really good marketer now with all the new digital things going on. But how do you compete? Do you compete with price, or how do you do it another way?
I think competing for prices by price is very difficult, because not everyone, first of all, has the same cost of doing business. I think it's easier to compete on price if you have a lower cost of doing business, meaning your staff salaries are lower, your rent is lower. If the young doctor thinks that you can just come to Beverly Hills and open up shop, wait till they see the cost of rental here. It's very expensive. The tenants pay a premium to be here, just as retail shops pay a premium to be on Rodeo Drive. The difference is, I will tell you that many of those shops on Rodeo Drive are not big money makers because their rents are so high. But the companies feel that they have to be there, whether it's Louis Vuitton or any of the high-end boutiques, just like they might have to be on Fifth Avenue or something in New York City. Doesn't necessarily mean, though, that the profit is there. And this is the difficulty. Here, the average wages are higher, and people here have a limit, though, on what they can spend on a procedure. And therefore, if the limits become less because their budget is tighter, then they'll be out of the pool even for low-cost providers. But certainly if you have a high cost of practice, that's going to be difficult, whether you're in Beverly Hills or Pasadena or in Houston or wherever you are. So my thinking about this and discussing with others is, how do you reduce your overhead? And one way, frankly, that we're seeing is doctors are sharing office space more than they used to. I think it's a good way to do it. Secondly, if you got any family members who are looking for a job, well, the answer is come down to the family business and work. We need you.
Yeah, right.
Some practices are actually literally family businesses, and I happen to think that's a good way to do it if your family members are interested and they have the skills and all that,
So you're saying watch your overhead. See, there's so many different ways to play this. A lot of the surgeons just spend a ton of money on the office, the ambiance, the staff looks great. They're in the 90210 zip code or one of those kind of zip codes. Their presence looks like it's 5-star, celebrity driven, but there's a cost to that. The overhead on that is unbelievable. And are you able? It would be okay if you're able to also charge accordingly. So
right.
You have to find the kind of patients who are willing to pay double or triple for a procedure because of that, because of your cachet and your ambiance and all of that. That's the part that I find so interesting. When we're all tightening up and everyone's freaking out, how does that affect you? Because if you're double the price of your competitors because you offer a more elegant patient experience, do you feel the pressure to discount that or drop your prices, yet you're still stuck with that kind of overhead?
Yeah, you're right. This is really important, and you certainly understand that because you've heard the stories and discussed it with your own clients, and that's the problem. Because what happens now, patients shop by price. Look what's happened with Amazon. Look how many retailers it's put out of business because you can buy it cheaper on Amazon. You can shop it in 10 minutes. You can figure out who's got the best price, rather than go from store to store to store when no one has time for that. So people do shop for cosmetic surgery as if it's just another commodity. Again, I'm not familiar with all the particulars in all geographic parts of the United States, but the internet is the great equalizer. It gives everybody the same information. And our experience has been there are people who said to us, well, yes, we'd like to be a patient here, but you Dr. So-and-so in another town 10 miles from here, look what he's charging. Well, we say, okay. I mean, again, from a practical standpoint, if we lowered our fees to match his, it would be $1 going in and $1 going out because our cost of practicing here is higher. So some people also sell their price as their selling point, that, oh, we're really inexpensive. Well, okay, they will attract a certain following. One of the negatives, though, is often many of those people are not necessarily the ideal patients. There is somewhat of a correlation between the behavior and one's personal behavior on the part of a patient, and the socioeconomic group in which they reside. I think every physician who's been in practice long enough knows that Medicaid patients are different than those who self-pay.
Right.
And this is a reality that you can't deny. It's a different attitude. There are people who look for insurance to pay for everything, and they come in and say, well, can't you bill insurance for this? And won't you bill insurance? And that becomes kind of a seamy world that you enter into. Some doctors will do it because they feel they have no choice. Is that the doctor you want to be when you basically, put in a position by a patient to want to game the system? Everybody views it differently. So there's a lot of factors here that this is not a simple matter of opening up your door and all of a sudden the phone starts ringing with high-quality patients. High-quality patient generally is someone who values quality. And there's another flavor to this, I think. The patients that shop by price, often because they're not particularly sophisticated and they're not looking at the other elements, which is service and quality. There's always 3 elements in every business transaction: price, service, and quality. But if they disregard the quality issue and even the service, how well they're treated, and they shop on price, those are the ones that seem to always be somewhat dissatisfied.
Right.
And that's a problem because you cannot have too many dissatisfied patients in a practice. That is, to me, a killer. Just like you can't have too many bad reviews, right?
Right.
Because these people become the voice to the public. And when they sit in the waiting room and complain, what's that going to do when somebody's there for consultation to see you? It's a turnoff. So you have to be very careful. And so quality is still number one. And then how does one build a quality practice that attracts quality people? And that's not easy. And it takes time. It takes time to build referral chains. After all, one satisfied patient doesn't necessarily lead to 10 new patients the next week. Doesn't work that way. A lot of patients don't talk about having had cosmetic surgery. Some won't even reveal it to their own sister.
Would you say that's changed a lot, or do you think that's still? I know it used to be really hush-hush. I was in San Francisco with the society crowd here, and it was very hush-hush, and there were only 2 facial plastic surgeons who did facelifts, and it was just super under the radar. But nowadays, do you think it's easier? Are the patients more readily available to chit-chat about it? How's that going?
My sense is younger patients, the people that are in their late teens and early 20s who have it, again, remember, those are the ones whose parents are subsidizing it, and therefore they're going to come from the higher socioeconomic. They are much more open about it because they all go to school with each other. See, they're looking at each other. They know what's going on. They know everything. They know every doctor. I'm amazed how sophisticated these young people are because they're clannish and they interact with each other, texting and emailing and sending pictures. But that's a small sliver of the population, say. The other part of the population isn't necessarily very open about it. And by the way, why do some people use the internet to research for cosmetic services when they could ask some people around or even ask their own doctor? Well, do you know anyone who's good at doing, facelifts or whatever? The reason is they don't want anybody else to know. The anonymous route is to use the internet, but that's a different kind of patient. That's different. They're not going to lead to referrals. You can often your best work leads to 0 referrals because that patient is not part of a talkative network. Right. The talkative networkers will lead to other patients, and that's why you have to be very good at satisfying that patient, because if you don't satisfy the networker, the local experts, if you will, remember there's always some people that are looked to as the experts, the mavens, so to speak. If you don't satisfy them, that's the end of that referral chain. And there's nothing better than a good referral chain, and nothing worse than the end of a referral chain, because the patient was unhappy. So.
Oh, for sure. You know what I think the biggest question is, and you mentioned quality. This is where I spend most of my time, because if it's quality, but that's so intangible, how do you prove quality? And you do a brilliant job of that with all, but you know what people don't understand? The effort that goes into that. So I'll say to doctors, well, have you written a consumer book? Have you done any speaking or writing? Have you done any talking in the community? Have you done any PR? All of that equals quality, like tangible proof. But tell me how much work that takes you to do. Like, what did you put into that to become the most quality practice that I think I know?
No, thank you, and I appreciate that. Well, first of all, it's a team effort, and I know you've always been very strong on the importance of the office staff, and that's absolutely true. You've got to find the best people because, like everything else in life, it is about people, and there's a certain personality who is ideal for these types of practices. There are other personalities who are not. At one end of the extreme, the ones you want are people who are positive, they dress properly, they act professionally, they are a good greeting for you. A hello, this is our office, and I'm glad to be working with Dr. Smith here, and it comes out from the minute they answer the telephone. Now, hard to find, and sometimes you have to poach them from other practices, but they're out there. They're out there, and you need them. You need a happy, smiling face at the desk. That's number one, because that suggests a warm environment, and we're all looking for that. Rather than, the old practices, and there's still something like that. You walk into the waiting room, and there's an opaque glass sliding window. And there's somebody behind it because you hear the staff talking. They don't even open it when the door opens, right? And you're sitting there waiting for someone to please open the sliding glass window. I mean, that's absurd. I mean, you have to have somebody there, right?
Yeah.
And it's a sign of...
Oh, it's so wrong. And if you're in the people business to put up barriers like that, it's such a no.
Exactly.
Not to do that.
Yeah,
do that.
And I think people now realize that. But so you have to have good staff, and people obviously care. How are you, Mrs. Smith, today? And sorry, it's a rainy day, and but we're glad you're here. And there's nothing like saying to somebody, welcome, thank you for coming. Frankly, one of the things I like to say to every patient that comes in at the end of the consultation, thank you for coming in to consult with us. After all, they've taken time out of their life. It's flattering if someone comes to see you. They're putting their life's history in front of you. They're discussing very personal things, and we should say thank you. We don't say thank you often enough. And even getting back to employees, I think, again, you have to study the basics of psychology. What makes people happy? What makes employees happy? It's not just money. That, I think, is the truth. It's respect, it's appreciation, and the greatest thing you can ever do is to say in front of the patient how good your staff member is. Mm-hmm. And frankly, that says two things. It says that you appreciate what people do. You're a decent person. That's what it says to that patient, you see. But it also says to the employee that they're valued. And I can tell you that the answers come from the books, the textbooks of psychology and human behavior. Nothing's better than a compliment. It works. And when people do nothing but complain about their office staff, either the office staff is really bad and you have to replace them, or there's something wrong with the doctor who doesn't have a sense of appreciation and thinks that he's the only person in the world, that it's somehow one man or one woman show. And that's another failing that comes across the patients. The patients come in and sometimes they'll discuss their consultations. I'm not ever interested in the doctor's name. I never ask them. But they'll say, well, I went to Dr. So-and-so, and all he did was talk about himself and how great he was. He didn't ask me any questions about what my thoughts are, why I'm unhappy with a certain part of my appearance, and what would I like to have. It's like, okay, we're going to do this, and let me tell you, I'm the greatest. I've done this movie star and that one. I think that's not going to work much anymore. Patients are getting, right? Yeah, it's a failing on the part of the doctor to understand that most people are interested in themselves, not interested in you, but they're interested in what you can do for them. See, and the over 100 years ago, a book was written by How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
I read that.
And everybody should read that because that's the basic of human interaction, and the emphasis is on the person, not someone else. One of the comments he made in the book was that someone told him once, gee, I met somebody that was really a very interesting person, and then Dale asked him, well, why were they interesting? He said, well, because they just asked me a lot of questions. So, in other words, that person was interested in someone else rather than themselves by asking questions and then really talk about themselves, and yet they were considered interesting. It's all there. It's all in the books. And if we don't read the history books, we make mistakes in political matters. If we don't read psychology books and human relations and business books, we will not do as well. I do think you have to be an eternal student. I appreciate your comments that you made about my career because I must admit I've learned so much and want to keep learning. And I have a cousin in the restaurant business, and we were talking one day with another cousin, and I said to the senior, cousin who's very experienced, a good businessman, I said, God, you know everything about the restaurant business. Why don't you tell Larry a few things he needs to know? He says, know everything. Are you kidding? I'm still learning. That is a smart man, and that's why he's very successful.
Now, there's a tip. Never stop learning. Never stop learning.
Never stop learning, and read the classics. If you want to learn about being a better executive, which I think we have to be, then you have to read the classic books about, being a good executive, whether it's Jack Welch, who just passed away, or some of the other experts that really tell the story. Here's a book by Robert Levinson, I think his name was, called A Great Place to Work. What makes some offices and businesses popular where people want to work there? You'd like to have an office, by the way, where you're sought after by prospective employees. If they hear that a spot is open in your office, if you have good office reputation, they'll be calling you, and that's what you want. But you've always been a strong advocate of that, and you're 100% correct. But by the way, back to your question about how do you do all these things, it's time. You have to give up the time to do it, and that time is subtracted from your personal life, because you can't subtract time from taking care of the patients, right? That's a given. So what happens is, and this is the dilemma of perhaps every professional, every business person in the world, it takes more time to do everything today because it's more complicated. Everything is more complex. You do have to study human relations to manage your office and to understand patients. You have to study marketing and advertising if you're going to, put your name out into the world, whether it's through the internet or social media. You really have to try to keep up. It's stimulating, it's interesting, but it takes time and money, by the way, because a lot of doctors, and you mentioned, are spending a lot of money on advertising on the internet and social media. Well, and you have to do that. You have to put out a massive effort, and there have to be many columns to support your structure, many columns of reaching out to the large pool of patients.
So let's talk about the good old days just for a second, because when you used to get a lot of PR from these reality shows and they were so new and you were at the cutting edge, we do have to thank who changed all this. Like, those shows really changed this to mainstream. It started, I forgot about Dr. 90210, but that was a good one. Extreme Makeover, The Ugly Swan, or whatever that was called.
That's right.
Yeah, and then people were willing to talk about it at the water cooler, and it was taking away the stigma of this. And I just think that helped us a lot. But then, of course, the Kardashians jumped in, and they brought it to a whole different level. But you know how there's always a good and a bad to everything? That helped a lot because it just opened up the world to anybody who wants to look good and who has the time and the money. There's plenty of options available. But now it's gotten really confusing because there are too many options. And then there are too many people who can help. Like, it doesn't have to be a surgeon. It can be, 14 other kind of specialties. But anyway, let's talk about the good times. When you did have that PR from those shows, how does that change your practice when you get that kind of regular exposure?
Sure. And by the way, you said it perfectly. It opened the country's eyes that it wasn't just for the rich and famous, that, a good share of the population could have it done. And by the way, it spawned financing by banks and credit companies, and just as it was always done with orthodontia, you could pay it over time. Well, that's great. People use credit cards as a way to finance it. But the most important thing was it showed that, real people, if you will, the average people, the average Americans, hey, this looks good, and patients are happy, and it's not $100,000. There's for a procedure, there was a lot of misconceptions. A lot of people thought a nose job was $100,000 or something. They didn't know. Now it entered their home through the television. Yeah, I can tell you my personal experience was that it was, first of all, it was really enjoyable and positive experience because I felt I was participating in something that would help educate the public. And if the public would be better educated, we would all benefit from it. All surgeons benefited from it, not just those who were on the programs. And I give the producers a tremendous amount of credit because I think they did it very well. Now, what happens to the individuals on the program, like myself, yes, it has a very positive effect. Yes, the phone rings and people come in. However, when that program ends, the phone isn't going to ring as much, say, because you're no longer regularly in front of the eyes of the public. And I have to give Dr. Robert Ray credit because he was kind of the backbone and the cement of Dr. 90210. It was really, many of us were what I call, in terms of Hollywood lingo, supporting actors.
Mhm.
But he had a very interesting personal life. It was a grabber. People want to know, well, what's Dr. Ray going to be up to next week? And he lifted the boat for everybody. And that was good. Everybody, I think, benefited, as you said. But don't count on that to make you rich for the rest of your life, because it's like a narcotic. You get a good practice high, but if you don't keep taking the narcotic, it goes away, and you can't necessarily have a new TV program every year. So they run their course, and you enjoy the ride, as we all did in I think the whole industry, but then at some point it just peters out. Now, what's taken its place to some degree is the growth of the internet. But that is a two-edged sword, as we've discussed here, because getting your message out through the internet is a lot more difficult than being featured on a weekly national television program.
The internet changed almost overnight as well, because it was the next best thing. Like, so now it was PR, then it became the internet, then it became, well, you need a really good website. Then you had to change your website because it can't look old. Then it became, SEO. Like, now you have to make sure people can find your website. That whole world, you really got a huge education on that, because you were there almost pre-internet, And now you had to develop your website, which means you have to develop your copy and what your look and feel, like what is your branding. How did you stay so open-minded to all of this? Because that's a really big, huge change, huge.
Well, you're right. How well you said it. And this is, of course, again, very parallel to other kind of freeways, if you will, in the entire world. I mean, everybody who has almost any kind of business would say to you that today it's much more complicated and much more difficult by a power of 5 or 10 or whatever. And if you want to still be productive and have an enjoyable practice, you just have to do it. If you don't, you'll just fall by the wayside. That's just the way it is. The quality of the work, of course, is very important, but that alone isn't enough. And you've got to be seen as a caring and concerned physician, and you should be, of course. But there's some who don't behave that way, and so those who don't will suffer. So I think what it does, it's a little easier to figure out what needs to be done if you're willing to do it, and that's the hard part. And the execution is hard. And what if you don't hire the right people to do your website? Or what if Google changes its algorithm as it did, a year or two ago, and everybody suffered? I mean, it's very frustrating. But if you believe that this is what you want to do in life, you trained a long time, you're prepared, I think you have no choice but to figure out how to prosper, just as the business person today has competition in the form of Amazon Prime and all that, which is very, very, very threatening to their success. It is a difficult world for everybody. Speaking of Chicago, my family had a manufacturing business, and there was a time when it was a very good business. And foreign competition basically knocked it off, just ended it. A four-generation family business. My grandfather started, worked very hard. My father joined him. The classical American story, wiped out by foreign competition. And that happened to so many businesses. There you couldn't compete. There was no way. There was just no way, because people buying products had price limitations, and if they could get it for free, for less money, it was made wherever it was in China, Mexico. Say, oh, good enough. Doesn't have to be great, good enough. And that's it. And that's a shame. So this is the feature of our society today.
Well, I notice as soon as the surgeons settle in and say, well, I've got a great website, I've got my SEO, life keeps turning it upside down. And then the Google algorithms happen, and then social media happened. So now surgeons, you have to be a great surgeon, a really good manager of people, a great leader of the practice to have a vision so your people know where you're going. Then you've got to have a killer business acumen to figure out the numbers, and most surgeons go to business school. And so on top of that, if that weren't enough, now you also have to be the marketer, because with social media, it's social. And I think, dear Lord, being a plastic surgeon today is more than many hats. You're wearing more than many, because if you're going to do social media, the patients want to see you in surgery, talking to patients, talking to your family. Now they want to know how's your family, what are your hobbies, where's your dog. I don't know how you compete in today's world to be good at everything. You need a team, but now you actually need you, and that's added another complex layer to all of this. So where are you at with all this social media? Are you in? You out? What do you think?
No, to be honest with you, I don't think I've been as participatory as others, because others use the social media more to reflect their social life or their personality, or they're a bodybuilder and they have a bodybuilder following. And so for me personally, I like to kind of limit the exposure to things that I think are dignified and professional. I think people would hopefully be more interested in my professional capabilities rather than my skiing ability or something, But everybody does have a different view of that, and I think you have to be comfortable. I don't want to do anything, Frank, that I'm not comfortable with.
I agree.
I'm not a guy that dances around, does a polka in the operating room. I've seen some really bizarre and unprofessional behavior in the operating room, for example, all designed to grab patient attention or prospective patients. That's not me, But for others, it may be fine, and it may work. It may bring in patients. I think you have to be, to thy own self be true, that great line from Hamlet.
Right.
You have to be yourself, be comfortable with who you are, and as soon as you try to be somebody else, it's probably not going to, it's not going to work. I think at the end you have to think about who you are and what is your own sense of dignity, what is your sense of self-respect. Will it translate to perhaps not having as many patients get in touch with you through Instagram or something? It may, but maybe you'll be a little stronger with your website, say. So I think there are various tentacles that are important. I don't think anybody can be super strong in all of them, but boy, did you say it well. You have to wear so many different hats today. It's daunting, and it's also, remember, can be expensive. We talked about expenses because it just is. When Google's algorithm changed and everybody was scrambling to get their websites back into a reasonable position, you can't do that yourself. You need experts to help you. And then what if that expert doesn't do it well? Now you've wasted dollars and time. See, so it's hard. Now, is anything any easier for our brethren who are in the non-elective world? I think they've got, as you alluded to before, working for hospitals and being under the thumb of hospital administrators, and that's what's become. I was speaking to a hospitalist a couple weeks ago, and that whole concept of a hospitalist being your doctor, and you wave goodbye to your personal doctor when you go into the hospital, is absolutely contrary to sound medical care. But that's what's happened. The hospital world has basically co-opted the physicians, and we could talk about that alone. It's a separate story, but it doesn't apply to our industry, but the lessons are there. It's about supply and demand. Why? Because we turn out so many doctors today. 2.5 times as many physicians graduate today as when I graduated medical school. The population in the United States is not 2.5 times what it was. So what that means is this law of supply and demand starts to work against physicians. And the insurance companies and the hospitals know that, see? And so now a lot of young people do not want to open up a practice, whether it's internal medicine or general surgery. They find it to be very daunting, and it is. So think about that as a challenge, and then think about it in the cosmetic world, where it isn't just a matter of opening the practice and getting patients from the hospital internists. Now you have to draw your population from the general public. Yes, it is very hard. But it's not, as I say, it's not that easy for our brethren anymore. And the hospitalist told me that even in the last few years, it's become very difficult to enjoy the work because they're under pressure from the hospital to discharge patients and put down 15,000 different diagnoses so the insurance company pays better. It's just become almost bizarre, that world. And so there's no easy place. There's no refuge.
Right.
And so I wish there was something easy, but I will say one thing. I think that for all those who are listening in, you have to have good advice, and you have to spend time thinking and talking to people. What are your colleagues doing? What's working, what isn't working, and then having consultants with the type of experience that you have. And this is a totally unsolicited testimonial, just so everybody knows. But Catherine, you've got your hand on the pulse. You know exactly what's going on, and it's really important. And the nice thing about working with consultants is if they understand your challenges and your dilemmas, you'll get answers because they know what's working, what isn't, perhaps in parallel situations. Because you have a national, you have a national following, Catherine, and even like I was talking to my accountant, and the accountants know what's going on. They know it. They know the problems that physicians have because it's good to have an accountant who has a lot of physician clients because they'll tell you what their gastrointestinal GI specialist clients what they're facing. So it's not easy for physicians. I think the bottom line is it's just become a much more challenging and difficult world for all physicians today. And even though there's a flight from insurance in that world, it doesn't necessarily lead to heaven. This specialty has its own challenges.
Well, there is something that keeps brewing for me that I watch. I watch some of the surgeons still have their eye on that one-hit wonder. They still want that surgery, and they're not thinking long-term as in patient for life mentality. And I know you live off of, you are a high-quality referral practice. And I feel like I'm talking to myself most of the time because there's so many fun, shiny objects out there for surgeons that are not just running scared, but they're also maybe bored, and they're like, oh, let me try this now, let me try this, and they jump around. And it's very short-sighted. And when I talk to them about, wait a second, everybody, slow down here for a minute. Rather than throw all your money at pay-per-click, running after those 1,000 leads that are going to create 5 surgeries for you, and now you've got your staff dealing with the 995 leads to get to the needle in the haystack. Why don't you take such better care of the 5 patients that you got and figure out how do you make those 5 talk to the other 5, talk to the other 5, and it exponentially. Remember that hair shampoo? Those 2 friends, those 2 friends, until those 4 friends, and those told 16. Or to golf analogy, you know what they say from an 18-hole golf course? If you just double like if you're on a golf course and you have a contest with a person, and every dollar you double it each 18 holes, it's some ridiculous amount. Yeah, it's some ridiculous amount of money. Yeah. Anyway, well, how did you get that mindset where, wait a second, I better take care of the patients I already have to grow it internally rather than chase all the shiny objects to grab that one-hit wonder? How do you get? They need to hear that, and they can't hear it from me anymore because I think they're sick of me saying it.
Well, I think it's in a way it's kind of common sense. In other words, if you can make somebody happy, and through not necessarily just the surgical route, but how they were treated, how they were handled, that's the closest thing to a return customer. And Dale Carnegie said he'd never be in a business that didn't have return customers. Well, that is a problem in cosmetic surgery. You can turn out a nice nose job for a gal who's, say, 25, and she may not come back to you for 15 years for her neck or something, or not bring her kid in. Well, that's another generation you have to wait for, right? So this is the problem. So what's the next best thing? The next best thing is to treat the patient with the best care you can possibly give. And we'll talk about some specifics because they've got a sister, they've got a cousin, and they're glad to extol your virtues and praise your work if they will. They may not, but let's say that they do. That's the closest thing to have a return customer because that leads to perhaps a chain. But it's not just what you do surgically. I think this is where and not just the machinery that you buy. It's what was the total experience. For example, if let's say you're an excellent surgeon, your work is good, you have few complications, but you never see the patient after surgery. You don't like to see the patient. Some doctors don't. They don't want to, or they're afraid they're going to hear complaints. So the staff sees the patient after surgery, and maybe the doctor waves from the hallway. Well, that's not good because the patient said, it was kind of crazy. I went to the doctor, he never saw me after surgery. I had some questions, and I didn't want to ask the staff. I wanted to talk to him. They didn't give me any time with him. And then I went back another time, and I had to ask for time with him, and he was rushed, and he's looking at a clock. I don't have any clocks on the walls in my office. I don't wear a wristwatch. I have no idea what time it is. I'll count on my staff to knock on the door if I'm running an hour, running late. But my point is that it's about that human being. And my fellowship was with Dr. Maury Parks. Dr. Maury Parks was one of the giants of the early facial plastic surgery world here in Los Angeles. I was very fortunate to have my fellowship with him, particularly after I got out of the service, because I really did have a lot of surgical experience. He said, if the patient likes you, they'll like your work. And at first, I didn't get that. I'm saying, well, what do you mean? What if it's not a great result? They're still going to think this is the greatest place in the world to have cosmetic surgery. But he was right because it's a subjective experience. And another one of my great teachers, Dr. Howard Diamond, who was the most prolific rhinoplasty surgeon ever in New York, said that when I was visiting with him, he says, you don't have to get a great result every time, just don't get a bad result. In other words, stay within a reasonable range of outcome and behavior, and you're going to be okay. So the office that doesn't have good staff, where the doctor doesn't see the patient after surgery and didn't spend very much time before surgery, didn't ask a lot of questions, but sat there and talked about himself, how great he was, and his 3 sports cars that he just bought, he's going to be at a disadvantage. He will be at a disadvantage, and his practice in the eyes of the patient is going to be diminished, and they'll be less apt to sing his praises publicly through public reviews or through personal referrals. And there's so many other little things that you can do that says, we are a good practice, and here's why. Does the doctor ever call personally to do a follow-up after surgery to see if the patient was a little anxious after surgery and maybe had a little more swelling or bruising or whatever? That little phone call, oh, hi, this is, Dr. Smith, just want to see how you're doing. Is the swelling going down? What's going on? Right? And what's wrong with that? What does that tell the patient? You care. It's all about, do you care? There's a great line from a Harvard professor in the 1920s, and I used it in my book that I wrote for patients to understand. He said, the secret of the care of the patient is caring for the patient. Mm-hmm. That's it. You've got to care for that person. You want them to know by what you do and how you behave that you are 100% on their side towards getting a great result and avoiding their unhappiness. What if the patient has some complaint and they're a little shy about complaining about it? You need to know. And so it's always a good question to ask them when they come back from a post-op visit. Gee, it looks like, to me, you look great and everything's going well. Any questions or concerns that you have? See? Because by asking somewhat open-ended questions, you're inviting them to share something you may not even thought about. Like the patient would say, well, doctor, to be honest with you, we had a lot of pain, and pain medicine you gave me didn't work. Well, so what about that? Well, there's a way to know, and that is either you or your staff calls the patient the next day. How you doing? Pain medicine working? Everything okay, right? It's that all these little things, and they take time, but the bonuses are huge because the bonuses are you are seen as a superior doctor. Does your office call the patients that have appointments if you're running late? Because let's say day starts late, whatever it is, you call them, you let them know, I'm sorry, just want to give you a heads up. Often patients complain that they went and sat an hour and a half in the office before the doctor saw them, and he comes to the room, looks at him, and said, yeah, sure, you need to have your upper lids done. See Sarah, she'll get you scheduled. Wow. What are the chances that the patient's going to schedule there? I think it's next to zero, right?
Yeah.
Again, little courtesies to the patient.
I agree.
We have a survey form. We have a survey form we give the patients a couple weeks after surgery. How was your experience with pain? Was the surgery center okay? Anesthesia, were you happy with the anesthesiologist? Did you feel you were well cared for? Were all your questions asked before surgery? Are you happy with the office's care after surgery? Why shouldn't you do that? Why shouldn't you know? How surveys pop up on the internet and everything. Big companies want to know. They need to know. They need to know, not necessarily about your personal experience with them, but they're asking questions. So I think those are the kind of small things you do that endear you to the patient, that say, yes, I'm a good surgeon technically, but more than that, we wanted to, and we hope we did give you the very best care. Because when you read some of the bad reviews, incidentally, the physicians, there's something that comes through pretty clearly. It's nobody seemed to care about me.
Right.
Not just I was unhappy with my result. Yeah, you'll see some of them. We'll all see some of those, But often they center around this office didn't care, service wasn't good, I had to wait too long. Why should patients wait too long? Can't you schedule appropriately? Right? Allow more time for the patients than you think. But if the doctor's in a hurry to pack as many patients as he can so he can, go home or do something else, I don't think that's good. I think you're judged by the whole experience, not just the result. And when Dr. Park says, if the patients like you, they'll like their results, he was right. And when Dr. Diamond said, you don't have to get a great result, just don't get a bad result. What he meant was not every case is going to be A+, but you'll still get referrals because the patient will be happy. By the way, sometimes they are happier than you might be as a surgeon.
Right.
In other words, you say to yourself, gee, I wish I could have done a little better. Maybe I should have, tightened the neck a little more. Maybe did this, and yet the patient's ecstatic. See, so it's perception, and the perception comes not only from the surgical result, it comes from the respect and appreciation the patient was given from the doctor, from the staff, treated well. Can we get you a glass of ice water, Mrs. Smith? If it's a rainy day and everybody's running late, well, thank you for coming. We appreciate that you brave the rain to come here. What does that say? That says that you're courteous, you're appreciative of them, you're thanking them for coming. I'm amazed. Sometimes I go in a store, they don't even thank you for shopping with them, right? Now, here's your receipt, sir.
I can't even go to the drugstore anymore. I'm not capable because I'm so attuned to customer service, and they've hired just the dregs of society basically at like those kind of stores like Walgreens or a drugstore. And I almost can't even participate anymore. I just order online because it's such awful customer service. Nobody looks at you. Nobody says thank you. You know how many times I say, "You're welcome," and they don't even understand my joke?
Yeah, I do the same thing. No, they don't get it. That's right. And well, see, this is because this is the grand design of big business in the United States. Because this is the big drugstore chains. The service is terrible, horrible. When given the opportunity, I always like to prescribe, if I have to prescribe something to a patient, to a small neighborhood pharmacy, as rare as they have become. But people want, the fact they're still in business means people are willing to pay more for service because they deliver, they treat you well, they have your prescription ready. I mean, you call some of these other chains, and of course they're closed for lunch between 12 and 2. It's almost comical. And by the way, the pharmacists are under terrible pressure to fill a lot of prescriptions in a short period of time, and that's why, here's a small detail again that patients appreciate. We order their prescription medications, routine pain medicine, a little antibiotic ointment ahead of time before surgery, okay? We phone it in their pharmacy, so it makes it easy. I say, look, we're going to phone it in, I have to go pick it up. But I want you to bring the prescriptions to the surgery center because I want to look at them and make sure they filled it right. So you see what I'm saying to the patient? Two things. First of all, there are mistakes that are happening, and that we know. Secondly, I care that everything be right, and I personally need to check and make sure the pharmacy gave you the right stuff. If I were a patient, I would think to myself, this guy's good, right?
Yep, and the details are the differentiator. If this is going to
exactly differentiate, yeah.
That is how you're going to differentiate yourself, just by offering more care and more service than somebody else. Gosh.
And good service, and why service? Because it comes from being a physician. A physician is an essential part of our life, and why shouldn't a physician be as good as he can be? Who wants to hire somebody who isn't as good as they can be or should be, right? So the point is, it's those little things. It's that call to the patient. Another thing is sometimes the patient will have like a skin rash or something, after procedure, and you say, okay, I'm going to give you a medicine here, and I want you to take it for 2-3 days, but if it isn't working, you must call me. Say, in other words, here's a prescription, goodbye. No, you must call me. And with lab tests, when we order a lab test, say we have to take a little nasal culture or something like that, we say to them, okay, it's Tuesday, we should have the results by Thursday night, probably Friday morning, but call the office at 3 o'clock on Friday if you haven't heard from us. We will call you as soon as we get the results. But if you haven't heard from us, why? Because you have to have a fail-safe system. A fail-safe system. So that your request is fulfilled and the result is known and action can be taken. Small thing, but the patient is saying to themselves, that's right, that's true, because they hear stories about a doctor orders a test and either overlooks the results or ignores it, and they never hear back, and then there's a problem. What if it comes back that there's a serious staph infection going on, right? That's why in our office I have to sign off on every lab test that comes in. Now, it's not like internal medicine where we have them, many lab tests performed every day. But when we do, I've got to know the result personally. I have to sign off on it, put it in the chart, and I will call the patient personally to discuss it. By the way, I don't leave that to the office staff because there are nuances, there are questions that have to be answered, and I want them to understand too that I'm on the case. I am on the case 100%.
And
is it good medicine? Yeah. Is it good business? Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it is. So to wrap it up, I didn't realize it was so late. We have been on for a while. You've probably been through like 3 recessions at this point, and I'm sure you've had a whole bunch of other things that happened. The last question would be then, what kind of advice would you give anybody in this industry that can be tumultuous at best? What would you tell them?
Well, I think you always have to look at your overhead costs, first of all. I think your accountant and advisor would say the same thing, because you never know when bad days are coming like now. Who would predict this? I think the fallout's not going to be good. So even though times are good, save for a rainy day. And secondly, you have to be efficient in your work. You have to just develop efficiencies. And again, you have to have really good people. You must find good people. It is really hard. I know that. It takes so much effort and time. You and I could spend an hour talking about that alone. But who can help you, and to run the best possible practice you can. The one advice I would say is fewer employees are better than more employees. I'd rather have 3 good employees than 5 average employees, because first of all, the 3 employees will do a better job, and secondly, the more people you have in an office, the less efficient everybody becomes. There's too much, often there's too much inappropriate conversation. I found better to have fewer people who will work harder and better than more who won't be motivated. And sometimes too, what happens is the lowest common denominator tends to become the standard in the office, and that's not good.
Yes, I've several surgeons have said to me, I was happier and more profitable when I had an office of 5 than when I had 20. There was so much drama and chaos, and nobody knew who was doing what. And he said he spent more of his day managing those 20 personalities, and it was a train wreck. And he is much happier now that he simplified.
Yeah, that's right. I would absolutely agree. And then again, you have to look at your marketing and advertising. But again, if you will focus more on who, from the minute that patient calls you, if you will absolutely improve your conduct, your office's behavior, your office's style, so that you book a high percentage of patients will be your patient, that's the best thing you can do. Mm-hmm. I think it sounds rather mechanical to talk about conversion rates and things like that. But the truth is that if people will take the effort to come to see you and are turned off because, you're wearing a dirty lab coat, right? Or you're not washing your hands in front of them, or your office staff greeted them like they were bringing in the coronavirus, and you don't get the chance to serve that patient, regardless how great a surgeon you are, then there's your problem.
Okay.
The aim should be 100% of people that walk into your office should become your patient, and that begins with the phone call. And the problem is nobody's going to have 100%, but that's what you should aspire to, and that means you got to watch every detail. You got to check everything. Unfortunately, it is very, very time-consuming, and you got to look at your emails that go out to patients in response to, say, they come to your website. What messages are you giving? Are there typos, right? Does it look sloppy? Does it look professional? Is it meaningful? Is it easy to read, right? All these things matter. I know it's a zillion things, but if you're not willing to do it, then guess what? It's going to be tough.
Yep. Well, everybody...
Detail after detail after detail, which, by the way, is the theme in surgery. What is surgery? It's a succession of details, any one of which, if not done well, impacts negatively on the outcome.
I've noticed the most successful practices, they are into the details. The surgeon, when the staff calls them micromanagers or he's really difficult and he's real picky, that's usually the sign of somebody who's managing well and running a real business, quite frankly. I couldn't agree with you more. Again, if we all get the habit of reading more written by business people, one businessman wrote, "I know everything that goes on in my office." Right. I know. That's hard because when you're a surgeon, particularly, remember, you're not in the office a lot of the time, or you're with patients. A man who owns a business a man or woman who owns a business because they can walk around all day and look at everything and talk and ask questions. There's a theory of business management called managing by walking around, right. Meaning look and see who's doing what. I have to give my dad credit for that. He was very good at that, and he walked around and he'd kind of kibitz and joke with some of the people in his little factory there and how the Chicago Cubs doing, and the answer was terrible, and he knew that was going to be the answer, but his staff liked that, they liked him, and I saw a great model, but he had a small business. It was easier to do, He had 20 employees at one time. That family business grew to be a lot larger, but just as you said, the profitability wasn't as good. That's just how it works. But the times had changed too, see, and that's the challenge. Most surgeons would prefer to hide out in the OR. It's where they're comfortable, it's where they're skilled, and I get that. But if you want to survive and thrive in today's world, you have got to become a businessman as well. And I know that's tough, but that's the reality. So that's why I'm spending a lot of my time now on business and leadership and marketing, and not just, and staff. I'm trying to, that's why this is about the business and marketing side. But anyway, we have got to wrap it up. Dr. Kotler, you are just a pleasure. You and I definitely think alike. Actually, there was another saying that I heard, and the saying is, they won't sue you if they like you. So,
well, that's generally true. Don't count on it. But I think that is true. Most reasonable people. Most patients are reasonable. If you play the odds, Most people are good and decent and honest. You're fine. They're all going to be the screwballs, the outliers. You try to pick them up at your consultation. Figure out, is it really worth taking care of this patient? If you listen, you see, if you watch, listen to them, it kind of comes out. If the doctor spends all his time saying how great he is, he'll never get the message. No, thank you. It's a pleasure to help, and I hope that we're helpful to all your listeners and your devoted fans.
Me too. Well, all of you, if you enjoyed this, I sure wish you would subscribe to Beauty and the Biz so you don't miss any more sessions that we have. If you would give me a great review, I'd appreciate that as well, because it helps us share and grow the community. If you want to share this with your colleagues and staff, that would be greatly appreciated. Please send me your comments and your feedback. You can leave me a message at my website at catherinemaley.com, or you can always DM me on Instagram at Catherine Maley MBA. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye, Dr. Kotler. I'll talk to you soon. Good luck, everybody, during this tumultuous time, and we'll talk again soon.
Yes, everybody, thank you. Stay healthy, stay good, and let's stay optimistic.
We hope you found valuable insight on this episode of Beauty and the Biz. For more episodes, tools, and Catherine's free book, visit www.catherinemaley.com. That's www.catherinemaley.com. And be sure to subscribe to get the latest practice building strategies delivered to you. And don't forget to share this Beauty and the Biz podcast with your staff and colleagues.